All right, so now I'm going to modify the code in the home controller in order to set the required report parameters. I'm going to make this dynamic. So I'm going to use the required parameter information of the specific report that the user wants to run and automatically supply their parameters. So I'm not going to build in the parameters for each report and save that information within the application. I'm going to use the information that I'm getting dynamically from the report server and dynamically adding those values. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a support method to build the collection of parameters. So I'm going to come down here and create a private method. And this is going to return an array of parameter values. So that's the return value. Parameter value is an object that's implemented by the execution web service. And I'm going to use those as the return here because that's what the web service needs. So this is just some separate code out of the flow of the main action method, index action method, in order to centralize this logic. Okay, and I'm going to call this get parameter collection. And I'm going to receive in here an execution info object. So I'll use the rsexec.executionInfo, and I'll name this execinfo. All right, so I'm going to pass that because that's the object after I have loaded the report that has the information about parameters for that report. Okay, so I'm going to once again use a generic list object in order to collect all the parameter information. So this is going to be a collection of those rsexec.parameter values. And I'm going to call this parameters and new up or instantiate that object. All right, and so now we have a place to save these parameters as I read them from that execinfo. Because there could be 0, there could be 1, there could be many parameters. All right, so the way that these parameters are returned or available within execinfo is as members of the parameters collection. So I'm going to loop through that collection using a for each statement. And each time through the loop, I'm going to be getting this report parameter object. So I need to deal with that. So that's the collection of objects. They're the object type that's exposed. Whoops. It would help to actually select the right thing from IntelliSense. Okay, there we go. Know what happened there. All right, and I'm going to name that report param. And this is going to be each individual object in that execinfo dot parameters collection. All right, so I'm going to be dealing with these report parameters, yet another object that's implemented by the web service that makes it easy to work with the data that comes back from the web service. All right, need to use rsexec again, and I'm going to create these parameter values. And this is going to hold the name of the parameter and the value that I want to assign to it. Okay, so I need to create a variable of that type, parameter, and new that up. Okay, so I have a new object variable, and this is the object that I need to provide to the web service. I could do this all in strings and so forth, but I may as well just create the objects that I need to provide to the web service. All right, first thing I'll do is I'll set the parameter name value to the name of the param All right, equal sign would be useful. That's why I was a little confused on the IntelliSense. Okay, so again, what I'm doing is I'm now setting the value of that parameter value that I'm going to pass to the report in order to specify the parameter values. I'm reading the value of the name property of this report parameter, which is an object that is exposed by the parameters collection of execinfo that I got when I loaded the report. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, I'll put in a couple blank lines, and then ultimately I'm going to use that parameters collection and the add method to add that parameter value. Okay, so I've jumped ahead just a little bit. Now, we've only set the name. We haven't done anything with the value. So now we need to add the code that actually assigns the value. Confession time. Here is where I chose to include a bit of a kludge to keep this sample application simple and not add a lot of code to the user interface and a lot of code to gather parameter values. In a real application at this point, you would prompt the user for parameter values, report parameter values, or you would preset parameters for a specific report so a user can only access a portion of the report. A lot of different ways you can do that. I didn't want to make this application a lot more complex with a lot of user interface code. So what I opted to do is just have a switch statement. I collected together all of the names of all the various parameters for all of the reports and sample reports. There's not that many. And assign just magic default values. Okay, so do a switch statement. I'm going to base this on the report param name value, so the name of the parameter. This is actually the internal name of the parameter as defined within each report. All right, now I need to add case statements for the various parameters. First one is the one we saw, begin date. And I'm going to set the value property of that parameter object to, in this case, August 1st, 2006 is a valid date for the data that's coming from the AdventureWorks LT database. I'll do a break. And then the next one I need, I'm going to do these in alphabetical order, is category ID. So this is where I have a report where the user selects a category. Bikes, I forget, accessories. There's 4 different major categories in the AdventureWorks LT database. All right, so this parameter value I'm going to set to 1, which is bikes. All right, another one I need is for end date. And here I'll set this to August 20th, 2006. All right, so we'll have about 20 days worth of data in the report. Next one I need is special discount. And I'll set that to 0.55, and that needs to be a string. As you can see, I'm getting a little squiggly because this value property is in fact a string. There's no fancy objects or anything. So I'll take the odd way out and call the string method on that number, and that's perfectly legitimate within .NET. Kind of weird, but it's okay. Okay, so that's going to be a 5.5% special discount for the report that will produce discounted prices. All right, then the last one I need is subcategory ID. And I'll set this equal to just a literal string of 5. That's the equivalent of the same thing I did in the previous one. That's the equivalent of doing the 0.55 toString, but now it's just a literal string. Okay, the subcategory one is there's a report in there where the user selects a category, bikes or whatever, and then has to select a subcategory, mountain bikes or road bikes or whatever. And so we're providing the 2 different values for those 2 different parameters. Oh, and I completely forgot to do that here, so I'll do this toString as well. Okay, and save my work. All right, so the switch statement just takes each parameter as it comes through in the loop and assigns a value to that parameter. And so then the last thing I need to do is return that array of parameters, which are actually parameter value objects, to the calling method. So I'll do a return, and I have parameters, and I need to convert it to an array because that's what the method is expecting. And so I just use the toArray method of that generic list object. All right, once again, save my work, and that's how we generate that collection of objects using that ugly kludge that I'm using in this simple application to assign values and then producing that collection. So now let's come back up to the index action method where we need to include this code. And specifically, I need to add it to this branch because this technique, using that collection of parameters, is specific to running a report using the render method of the web service. All right, so I need to do this before I do anything else. So I'm going to add it to the beginning of this code block. Again, this is the code block that executes when the user clicks on the View Report by Web Service button. Now, I don't want to execute that method that I just created, this getParameterCollection method, every time I execute a report, because not all reports require parameters. And in fact, only 3 reports in the sample reports folder have required parameters. Fortunately, the exec_info has a really nice method or property that indicates whether or not there are any required parameters. So if parameters required, that's true if there's parameters, false if not. So I'm just going to do this as an if statement. And now I'm only going to call that method, this getParameterCollection method, if there are in fact parameters to process. This method doesn't do anything useful if there are no parameters, but it's just extra overhead that just slow down the application a few milliseconds. Okay, so if we reach the body of the if statement, the report has parameters, so we need to do something about them. All right, so I'm going to use the rsexec again to call into that namespace, and I'm going to get an array of parameter values, because remember that's the return value from the getParameterCollection, so I'm just mirroring that right there. I'm going to call it parameters, and I'm going to call that method. Remember, I need to pass in that exec_info. I happen to name it the same variable in both in this method as well as in that method there. All right, so I execute that. So now I have this array of parameters in this local variable, and now I need to set parameters for the web service. And this is again going to use a stateful setting in order to set the state for the web service with those parameter values. So I'm going to use that method, and I'm going to use the set execution parameters. So it's a method that I need to do this, not a property. And I pass in that parameters variable, the one that I just created right there, that now has that collection of parameter values. It's actually an array. And then I have to give it the language encoding, or the parameter language. And so this is all EN-US, because I'm in the US and it's English that I'm using right now. And that's all you need to do to include parameters. So let me save it and give it a whirl. Assuming I haven't done anything wrong, this should load the display page once again. The user can select a report, and it'll render whether or not it requires parameters. Okay, there we go. I'm first going to render a report that doesn't require parameters, just to make sure I haven't broken anything. So in this case, it goes to that if statement, doesn't find any parameters, ignores it, and then just executes the code as previously. All right, now let's go to a report that requires parameters. This requires a begin date and an end date. And I'll click on this. Now it's executing that custom method that we created. And this report happens to display the parameter information, so you can see that I'm getting that 8/1/2006 and the 8/20/2006 that I included in that switch statement for the begin date and end date. And it displayed the report. If I go back over here and let's see, the other one I think was unbound, display that. That also displays, and this is the one, I had my decimal point off in the wrong place. I intended a 5.5% discount, but I included 55%. And so people today are getting a big discount. And so it displays the parameter values as well. All right, and then the last one is this products by category multi-valued. And there we go. This is the one that uses the category of bikes, and I selected subcategory of mountain bikes. So this is the category ID 1, and this is the category ID of 5. And so I get the subset of this report that displays mountain bike information. Okay. While I'm thinking of it, I'm going to fix that one thing, because this actually needed to be 0.055. Okay, so now that'll be the 5.5% discount.